one of the reasons I wanted to show you this slide is simply because I want you to be aware of the stance of mainstream organizations like the Institute of Medicine, the American Heart Association. They know this is the information they're providing people with. For some reason, people still aren't quite getting it. The World Heart Federation says a person eating a diet low in saturated fats with plenty of fruits and vegetables has a 73% risk reduction for new major cardiac events compared to someone eating a Western-style diet. So what about rates in vegetarian and vegan populations? Well, EPIC Oxford, 45,000 participants followed for 12 years, found that vegetarians were less likely to develop heart disease than health-conscious meat or fish eaters. This was really interesting. They actually were 32% less likely when, and this was vegetarians plus vegans lumped into one, when all the variables were adjusted for except BMI, which is body fatness, and then 28% less likely when they also factored in body fatness, so how overweight somebody was. Now, this fish eater thing, I thought this was the strangest finding because normally fish in most of the epidemiological studies have found to be somewhat cardioprotective relative to meat. So when fish eaters are compared to meat eaters, they tend to do better. So I actually, this was, I called one of the lead researchers on this study and I said, what the heck? How come the fish eaters didn't do any better than the meat eaters? And he said, I don't know. And I said, could it be because in the UK, you tend to dip your fish in fat before you eat it, as in fish and chips? He said, oh, yeah, maybe that's it. So it's a possibility. The Adventist Health Study, again, over 73,000 participants. And with men, the vegans had 42% less cardiovascular disease and 55% less ischemic heart disease. Lacto-ovo vegetarians were 23% less cardiovascular disease, 24% less ischemic heart disease, and the numbers that are bolded are significant. The ones that aren't bolded are non-significant. Pesco vegetarians had 34% less cardiovascular disease and 23% less ischemic heart disease. In the women, there were no significant differences among the different dietary groups, except the Pesco, the fish-eating women, had a 49% lower risk of ischemic heart disease. And again, I phoned Dr. Orlick, who was the author on this, and I said, what's up? Why are the women not doing as well as the men? It doesn't make sense. And he said, I don't know. And I said, could it be possible, just what I told you before, that the women have smaller differences, the meat-eating Adventists versus the vegetarian Adventists than the men? And he said that really is a possibility. So, but they're not, we really don't know for sure. So why do vegetarians and vegans tend to do better where heart disease is concerned? Well, they have more favorable risk factors. So when we look at major modifiable risk factors like overweight and obesity, elevated total and LDL cholesterol, elevated triglycerides, and high blood pressure, vegetarians and vegans at a group are at lower risk for all of these things. When we look at emerging risk factors like oxidized cholesterol, inflammation, poor antioxidant status, greater IMT, elevated TMAO. I'm going to talk about all of these things. But again, vegetarians have a benefit for all of those emerging risk factors. So let's first talk a little bit about the major modifiable risk factors. Well, here we've got EPIC Oxford. If you look at overweight and obesity, the lowest BMI is in vegans. You can see. Then lacto-ovo vegetarians, about the same as fish eaters, and both less than meat eaters. But what's really interesting here is if you look at the BMIs, they're all within the healthy BMI zone, even the meat eaters. And this is a European study. But the vegans have the healthiest BMIs. This is Adventist Health Study too. Here's the vegans, lacto-ovo, pesco, semi, and non-vegetarian. You can see the numbers, the BMI is going up, and a healthy BMI is between 18.5 and 24.9, right? And so here, within the United States, the Adventist Health Study, the only group that was in a healthy weight zone were the vegans. Everybody else was above the healthy weight numbers. Elevated blood lipids, again, as you go from vegan to lacto-ovo to non-vegetarian, blood cholesterols go up, LDLs go up. HDLs are not much different. They're a little lower in the vegans, but not a lot. Triglycerides are lowest in vegans. They're actually highest in the lacto-ovo vegetarians, and this is based on about 20 studies. And somewhere in between in non-vegetarians. And that would, triglycerides tend to go up as your intake of carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates, goes up. So these people may have been eating too many refined carbohydrates. What about hypertension? Epic Oxford shows lowest rates of hypertension among vegans, like 5.8% among men, 7.7% among women, and then going up and 15% among meat-eating men and 12% among meat-eating women. So really a very significant difference. In the Adventist Health Study too, hypertension was 75% lower among vegans, and it was 55% lower among lacto-ovo vegetarians than it was among health-conscious meat eaters. So very, very significant finding. So what about the emerging risk factors? Inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation increases metabolic abnormalities that are associated with cardiovascular disease, and it makes arterial plaque vulnerable to rupture and thrombosis. So this is a serious issue in risk. So vegetarians, what we know is 4 out of 5 studies assessing CRP levels, and CRP is your indicator for inflammation. It's a blood test you can do to test your levels of inflammation. Vegetarians showed significantly lower levels of inflammation compared to omnivores. And there was only one study on vegans, and this was actually on raw vegans, but the vegans had a CRP of 0.57 compared to endurance athletes, 0.75, compared to people eating a Western diet, 2.61. And a really healthy level is 1 or less. So the vegans had the best level by far. What about oxidative stress? Well, hyperlipidemia, which is, high cholesterol and high triglycerides, causes oxidative stress and reduces our antioxidant defense system, elevating levels of sort of damaged fats in our bodies. High intakes of dietary heme iron, that's blood iron, the iron from meat and fish, and not all of the iron in meat and fish is heme iron, but probably 40 or 50% of it is, and from saturated animal fats are associated with increased oxidative stress. And dietary cholesterol actually increases the susceptibility of LDL to oxidation by nearly 40%. Limited evidence suggests that vegan and vegetarian diets decrease the oxidation of lipids, probably owing to the high antioxidant and no heme iron content in these diets. And also, vegetarians tend to have more favorable antioxidant status, and this is important to know. Food sources of antioxidants are protective. Supplement sources of antioxidants have not been shown to be protective. Okay? So very important to know that. Carotid IMT, and here we're looking at this kind of layer where plaque develops within the blood vessels, sort of the outer layer. And when you have a high IMT or carotid IMT, it increases dramatically your risk of heart disease, and diets high in meat and low in fiber can increase this carotid IMT. Well, vegan diets and near vegan diets tend to reduce it. So what about this high TMAO, which vegetarians tend to be protected against? Well, high TMAO accelerates atherosclerosis especially in heart failure patients. The highest TMAO levels increase their risk of dying by 3.4 times. So this is really significant. Omnivores who regularly consume red meat are ideal hosts for the bacteria in the intestines that produce TMA. And vegans have none of the TMA-producing bacteria, 0. So even if you take carnitine from a supplement, you won't produce TMA because you don't have the bacteria to make it. So we don't have those bad bacteria. And then the TMA gets sent to the liver and it gets converted to TMAO, which causes the damage. And in fact, it can also be produced from choline, which is very high in eggs as well. But we get choline from some plant foods, but again, we don't have the bacteria to produce the TMA from it. So this is good news.